Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Oke Okaga, and I'm the current president of the African American Network here at DISH. We thank you all for coming here to the Lunchtime Intersectionality panel with Collective Resource Groups, or the longest panel name you've probably ever heard. So thank you, guys. First of all, we would like to just thank all of the resource groups for having representatives that are here to help us facilitate and be panelists on this. First of all, I'm going to introduce Dave Scott, who will be the facilitator for this event, and then we'll go into sort of some definitions and then questions, which were pre-selected by some of the groups. So, Dave Scott is the Executive Vice President or Chief Human Resources Officer here at DISH. Dave oversees the company's recruiting, benefits administration, compensation, and leadership and organizational development. Dave came here to Denver about a year ago from Arkansas after a 20-year career with Walmart. So let's all welcome our favorite Dave.
Shouldn't Dave be on the panel then?
No, Jeff. I ask the questions. I don't answer them today.
I know.
This is my fun, not yours. How's everybody? Good? I can see it's PA season because most of my direct reports showed up. Post-PA, they were like, oh, he's got another 9 months before I have to worry about being nice to him. No, this is, what a great opportunity. I tell you, I find all of our panels that I get a chance to attend super interesting. This one I think is going to be really neat because I've yet to see such an esteemed group of perspectives, backgrounds, and ideas that they're here to talk about it, and it's a relatively complex topic. Right, and so before I introduce the panel, I may just spend a second on what is intersectionality. And I am probably not the expert to speak on this because it was probably 2017, maybe the Women's March, I think, is when I probably started hearing the most about intersectionality and how does this conversation come about. But as I was doing some research in preparation for this, really it's a phrase that started back in the late 80s, early 90s, from a brilliant Columbia and UCLA law professor that talked about intersectionality. And her name was Kimberly Crenshaw, was her name. And she both wrote a very interesting paper that is on mapping the margins. But has also done some great TED Talks if you've had a chance to watch that, and still continues to be a speaker as she leads the African American Policy Forum on intersectionality. And I would say intersectionality at its base definition, right, is when multiple characteristics of diversity begin to cross that, quite honestly, compel the inequality, right? It increases it extensively. And really, I think the best story, and one that she wrote the paper on, was based off a case in 1979. And it was a set of black women that were filing a suit against General Motors. And the purpose of the suit was they were unable to get a job. And General Motors was able to show data that said they don't have a problem hiring women, and they don't have a problem hiring blacks. Problem was the women's job were in the receptionist area in the front of the building, and you could only be a Caucasian woman and work there. And the black jobs were on the floor, but it was only black men. And so in this cross of being both African American and female, their inequality was plussed up. And she came up with this term of intersectionality, and for a long time, it dealt with primarily feminism, right? But it's grown in recent years, and I think as the panel talks about, I think each of them can talk about places where both primary and sometimes hidden characteristics of diversity can create moments where they're disadvantaged, right? And I encourage us to just have a really transparent conversation because I know I don't learn unless we talk about it openly, and I'm excited to hear what the team has to share with us, and it's a really neat opportunity for us all to have one of those moments where you ponder a little bit and understand both what are our individual behaviors that we can think about, and then what are our collective behaviors as a group, and then what are the organizational behaviors that can help drive forward a place where we can bring our whole selves to work. Sound like a good plan? I have a few questions I'll ask. If you've got one that's burning in your heart, just scream it out. There's kind of no rules other than I think we have to end on time. That may be the only rule that I have, right? Great, perfect. Let's jump into y'all. So I will start with some brief introductions, but more importantly, we'll jump into questions here. So Shannon, welcome. Shannon's our VP of Billing and Credit. So we're excited to have you on the board. She's representing what previously was talked about as the Working Moms Group, but you've got a new title.
We do.
Yeah, you want to grab the mic and tell us?
It is, are you ready? The Empowered Parents Network. So that obviously means dads, your parents, anybody who wants to join is welcome to join, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and regardless of phase of life, really broadens the opportunities for y'all to talk about a much more dynamic conversation. And I think intersectionality really plays into that. Shannon's had a over 20-year career here at DISH, so a fantastic representative of the organization, and has grown up into her current role of VP of Billing and Credit, but also during that time you've managed to have a beautiful family.
I have.
Yep, two well-rounded kids that are off to college.
They
so
are.
I'm begging to get to that phase of life. And
Careful what you wish for.
I know, and I think a representative of somebody that really understands work-life balance here in the organization and has achieved an executive position. So I'm excited to have you on the panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Many of you know Barry. Barry leads our marketing finance team and recently started the Out at Dish program, and it launched on National Coming Out Day last year. So super excited about that. Barry, you've been with us since 2012, I think, as you were wrapping your MBA. Is that the story that's right?
Yeah, I was an intern in the summer 2012 and then came back full-time in the summer of 2013.
So, and that MBA was at Indiana?
Indiana.
Fantastic. So again, another great example of growth in careers. Excited to take you from the early infancy of internship into leading a team here, and very excited to see what Out the Dish has done. It's also the most popular T-shirt in the company right now. It's highly desired T-shirt out there.
We're working on getting more.
Good, excellent. We're glad to know that. So welcome, Barry. Tasha, who's our director in IT, welcome to the panel. We're excited to have you. Tasha's representing the DISH Women's Network. Comes with big degrees, so we've got both a Bachelor of Information Systems from the University of Colorado and an Executive MBA from the University of Denver. So very excited to have that on with you. I've been here since 2006, as I understand. So we're super excited to have you on the panel. And as we talk about the importance of intersectionality and certainly the importance I think that the Women's Network has in help really foster the growth of all of our resource groups over the last several years and the role that you've played in that. So thank you for joining us. Obviously, at the middle of the table hails our IT party, because Duncan is also a director on our IT team. Duncan hired you. Fantastic, great work there. Duncan, you started back in 2003, if I understand, right? And you were leading the applications development team. So it has come in, led team in sales as well, if I understand, and at sales applications. So, and then in 2009, we're promoted to director. So congratulations on 10 years of directorship here at DISH. We're excited about that. Duncan's representing the African American Network as he joins us here on the panel. And so we're excited to have you with us. And Jeff down in the end, as we, many of us know Jeff and have a chance to work with him in his new role in wireless. So Jeff, welcome to the panel. We're excited to have you. Understand you've been with us forever? It's actually what it cites in here since before paper, 1995, right?
1994.
1994.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think this was a new fact to me, actually, is that prior to joining EchoStar at the time, is that you were in communications with the Air Force.
Yeah, there were some other jobs in
So
between, but yes.
Okay, and so thank you for your service at that time, and we're excited to have you on the panel representing the veterans group, and a great opportunity to not only give a long-term perspective for DISH and EchoStar, but also bring in that military conversation. So let's welcome Jeff to the panel.
Thank you.
So we've got everybody in play here, and maybe we'll start off with a little bit easier question, right? We'll jump into kind of how does all of the aspects of your diversity, and so if we talk about race, we talk about gender, socioeconomic status, how does that build up to the person that you are today? What are the good and the bad of how that builds up? Maybe we'll get a couple of answers on just what does it mean to think of all of you at work?
Want us to free for all?
Yeah, yes. I'm going to let one of you jump in on this. We'll get more directive by who's the quietest.
Sure, I'll start. How about that?
Thanks, John.
So I grew up actually in southern Colorado in a farming community. It's mainly Caucasian and Mexicans. And my family was pretty poor, so we actually worked a lot of the farms and worked a lot of the cherry fields and stuff. And so I worked next to a lot of the illegal aliens that had come up because they needed the work. And it opened my eyes big time because I'd never really seen much go on until I did that, and there were some people that owned the fields that would make sure to hold people down, and that included everybody. It wasn't just the Hispanic, Mexican families. And then other people were more interested in helping people take the step up, right? And it was kind of interesting because one of the people I worked for asked me if I would stay after in the evenings and teach English. And I just thought, that's pretty awesome, right? I mean, if they learn English, then they're going to be able to do better things and not be stuck. And other ones, when I asked, after the one guy asked me that, the other guy we worked for, he said, hell no, we're not doing that. He goes, they'll leave here and go work somewhere else, right? And so it was kind of like, my first foray into seeing where things could go and not go, right? And so for me, it was just totally eye-opening. And it opened it up at a very early age because me and my brother started working at 12, working at these cherry farms and picking cherries and pulling onions and potatoes or whatever we were growing, pinto beans, right? And so it just made it a completely different world for me all of a sudden. And my family, because we lived in a primarily Caucasian area, pretty much everybody you were ever around was Caucasian. And then all my friends became Hispanic, and then I ended up marrying my wife who's Hispanic and working through that. But yeah, it just was a different kind of way to grow up, right? I mean, I never really saw that difference, and TV wasn't like it is today where I can watch, you can figure out what happened all the way around the world every second of the day and see all the good and the bad that we have as humans out there. But then it was kind of like this closed off, weird place, right? Because you thought you were in this great place where everybody loved everybody, and you go to church and everybody talks all these great things, but then you go out and work next to people and you're like, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really fair, right? Why is it that way, and why aren't people treated that way? So for me growing up, that was a big one, right? And I think you also asked about, as part of this, was kind of what happens today in your culture situation, right, with social stuff. And when I'm in front of you guys or I'm at work, I'm an extremely extroverted person because I know what I'm doing, I love it and everything. When I'm actually at home, if you guys saw me, you probably wouldn't even recognize me because usually I'm wearing pretty crappy clothes and I'm pretty greased up because I like working on cars and stuff, and I go around and it's just a different world, right? So, it depends on where I am. And so if I go with my wife somewhere, it's not about me. And so I don't want the discussion to be about me because a lot of times people will, with LinkedIn now, people will LinkedIn you, right? And they'll say, oh, we see you're this. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. You got me confused, right? We're here for my wife. She's an artist and I'm just listening, right? And so, it's just kind of different, right? But your position can allow you to afford different things, right? I mean, and that's one of the things that's kind of odd, and I don't really like it. Like, you go to some things and you'll feel that because of, being an EVP or something, people will treat you sometimes differently. And I'll call people out. So I'm kind of a verbal person when it comes to this stuff. If somebody does that, I don't have a problem calling somebody out when I see things I don't like. But it does affect, right? I mean, what you wear affects. I can tell you a great story. We bought a hot tub when we lived in Wyoming. My wife went in to buy the hot tub, and she said, I want that one. And the guy said, that's too expensive for you. You should buy this one. And she said, well, why is that? And he said, well, you just look like you can't afford it. I'm like, interesting. So she called me, and I said, go to a different place. So she went to Fort Collins, paid cash for the hot tub because we've been saving. And then I said, go back to that guy and show him the receipt, please. And she's like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I said, I'll meet you there. So I met her after work, and we walked in, and I said, look, I just want to be clear, right? You're an ass. You treated my wife bad because she's Hispanic, and you thought that we're broke, right? And I said, you can't judge a book by its cover, so hope you learn a lesson here, right? And walked off. Now, I don't know if the guy did or not. But I mean, I think as part of our job in the world, especially in my case, I am a Caucasian person, and I have been able to do well in my business life, right? I have a responsibility to step up and help others who can't, right? And so, because there are other people, my father-in-law does not stand up for himself. I mean, he's a 82-year-old Hispanic man. I bought him a new Jeep Wrangler. He took it in to get it fixed, and the guy wanted to charge him $2,000 even though it's under warranty. And so I drove all the way down to Montrose and walked in with the same car, didn't say a word, and said, I want it fixed. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll get it for you. And I said, no, hold on a minute. So I went and got my dad and came in. We had the same conversation we had about these others, right? But we have to stand up because sometimes people have been beaten down so hard, they won't stand up. And even in his life, he was a nurse, and he wouldn't stand up, right? And I'm like, Joe, you got to stand up, right? You can't let people do this to you. No, if I stand up, I'll lose my job. And I'm like, no, if you stand up, I'll spend all the money I can to help you not lose your job. Or if we do, you'll get some money for it, right? But so for me, it's just been a different run. Yeah. I mean, I just learned a lot really early, right? And it wasn't from my family. It was just from having to go work in fields with folks that just bust their ass every day and get treated bad every day, right? And so I just learned a lot. So anyway.
Thank you. Other perspectives from the team?
I don't know where to start in that situation, and I can follow what Jeff kind of went through in terms of your background. I grew up in Denver, in a African American or a black community. Went to a black church. Most of my neighborhood was predominantly black. Was part of forced busing when that started in Denver. I was in elementary school in the 70s. And you live in, I don't know if many of you heard of or know about dualities and how black people and others have different, I don't want to say it's a different personality, but it's a different way that you see yourself and the way that others see you and the way that you are socialized to operate in our society. And so you go through these kinds of things and you learn about them. So my family is an interesting story. I'm third generation Denverite, which is odd, actually. My grandmother was born and raised in Denver. She went to DU, had a degree in library sciences, but couldn't get a job in that. My grandfather went to DU. Bernice McLeod Sr., you may have heard of him. He was a photographer in the Denver area that did, he documented really African American history in the Denver area through photos. And so you can go to the Denver Public Library and you'll see some of his work. He was a janitor at the state capitol even after getting a degree at DU. My mother, Texas transplant, grew up on a farm in Texas. You'll hear stories about Juneteenth and how Texans were told about their emancipation and that kind of thing. Grew up, on a farm and came to Denver as a single mom. Before I was born, this is my sister's. She went to DU. Now she made a way and forced her way through the system and actually became an educator, master's degree and those kinds of things. So lots of education in my background, but also a lot of preparedness in terms of what you have to face in the real world, right? Don't go through life with blinders, but we're going to try to expose you to other things. And so I kind of had, I had this, again, through the busing, we interacted as kids, right? We hung out with each other and we played and hey, this is my friend, and we're all kids, right? You kind of get to a place where, hey, we traveled. My mother again was trying to expose me to other things, and so you start getting kind of a different perspective of things, but you're still black in these perspectives. So traveling around the world, it doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or you're in Europe or you're in Israel or you're anywhere else, Spain, right? You're called out for what you look like, right? Hey, I'm this big, tall, black guy. I'm Michael Jordan, right? And so anyway, to bring this story all around, it's like, hey, so from a perspective, there's different perspectives, and I think that this is an opportunity, for us to share our perspectives on things, right? And that we intersect in different ways. And Tasha and I were kind of talking about how you might have multiple intersections. I think you brought that up with folks who are here. But there's definitely a different perspective, right? And as we grow, you know, you go through different stages, and I'll share this, that I went from maybe a naive perspective of, hey, I feel like things are better for me than they were for my parents in some ways. And in some ways, as I got older, I don't know that that's really totally true, right? That there are things that aren't necessarily what they may have been on the surface as you start to see how things kind of unfold. But I appreciate everyone being here today, and I appreciate you inviting me to be here on this panel.
No, thank you for sharing.
Are we just going to go along?
No, it's
All right. Okay. So people who have heard me speak at Dish Women's Network before, I apologize if you've heard this story. I did mention to Duncan when I sat down that I actually could sit in any of these seats through different interactions that I've had, which really helped me. I didn't even know the definition. I'm actually going to go look up that Crenshaw that you mentioned. But for me, I was raised by a single mother who had me at 18, divorced at 19. There was no question. They were not educated. Both of my parents did not go to college. But there was no question that I was actually going to go to college. She was going to hold me accountable, and nothing was going to hold me back. And so I didn't realize the differences between women in the workplace. I was just a fighter, and I went and you mentioned my education and kind of what I went through. It wasn't until I started deciding I wanted to change from just having a job to then wanting a career that all of a sudden I started looking around and popping my head up and realizing I'm a fighter. Why is this not happening for me at the pace or at what I wanted? And what it took was somebody believing in me that I didn't believe in myself. So I look at my history, and I was given all these skills to get me to where I was at, but it really took the people in my life, and there's people here at Dish who, Duncan's one of them, that believed in me, that really lifted me up. And so I would say for me, what I've been given is I got to where I'm at 40-something years old. And I want for the other women that I work with, the people that I live around, I want them to hit that pinnacle of their life and feeling just wonderful about being lifted up sooner than I did. It took longer because I didn't have the parents that understood education. I didn't, I had to work during college. There were just so many things I had to work for. And so from my perspective, why I love the Dish Women's Network is you get to share your story, but you get to share that there's enough for everyone. This is not something that is just for me, and I get to sit up here in front of all of you. Every single person in this room has the capacity, and when you have somebody that believes in you and you share those experiences, we all get to grow from that. And so from my perspective, I feel like I come with, so I grew up in Hawaii, which is a very diverse place, there's just so many opportunities I've been given, and I just want to share that with everybody I work with. So that's my background.
So I grew up in Southern California, but I left over a decade ago, so don't hold that against me. But I think growing up in Southern California, it's a fairly progressive place, and so you kind of grow up in an environment where you learn that everybody's equal, everybody has the same opportunities. You're raised to believe that everybody should have the same opportunities in front of you. So on one hand, it's great because you get to grow up with kind of this very broad perspective. But on the other hand, you grow up kind of naive because you really do think that nobody else is facing any struggle and everybody's experience is very similar to yours. And I've had kind of a pattern of putting myself in interesting situations. I like to joke around that at one point in time I was a recovering frat boy. So like in college, I was like, oh, I'm in college. Like all my friends are joining fraternities at this. Like I should go do this. And then you hear a lot of like things that you shouldn't hear necessarily. But the one thing that really taught me very early on is that diversity is not always visible. Just because you don't see diversity doesn't mean that it's not around you and that you shouldn't say things. So you hear lots of jokes that you pretend to laugh at, and then like you go home and have some beer and ice cream and pretend that nobody ever said anything. And after college, I kind of realized that LA sucks, like most of us probably think. So I left. I moved to Seattle, which was another really progressive city. And it was a great place. But I worked on the trading desk for a large bank. And it's kind of like a very like old school environment. It's very like masculine dominated. and again, like nobody really stops to think that you don't, just because you don't see diversity in front of you, that you don't have to keep your mouth shut. So I'd be on the phone with some of our trading partners, and they'd be like, "Oh, did you hear this F word over here once this?" And it would have like such a frequent occurrence. And then I remember I said something to my boss one time, and she was very, very old school, and she made some joke about like, "Oh, you're just one of those whining F words also." And I was like, "Oh, okay, this is like a really large bank that's still a large bank after the financial crisis." But you just kind of like, for a while I thought that my role in life was just kind of shut up. Nobody wanted to hear anything about my experience. Nobody wanted to do anything about it. So you kind of learn from those perspectives that, like on one hand, I think it makes you a little bit more sensitive to diversity around you, and you want to make sure that everybody does have the same opportunity that you think that they do, and you want to make sure that they're, I think it gave me a heightened sense of awareness to make sure that I'm not using any language that cuts people off or isn't inclusive. But at the same time, it made me a little bit more guarded with what I would share about like my personal life or the weekends or like where we went. So like I took a trip to Vancouver one time, and a group of us went, and I was too afraid that like in telling any story about my weekend that it would reveal details about my personal life that I didn't want to be known at work. And so like I just didn't tell anybody about this awesome trip that I went on. And then Duncan was kind of saying earlier that when you travel abroad, like you don't necessarily know what the perspectives of that country are. So like my partner and I went to Europe 2 years ago for a vacation, and we made sure that we were walking down the street, like let's like not be too close to each other, like let's not try and speak English on the train so nobody thinks we're American, but also like stay away from me, like those kind of things. And it was interesting because like we were in like Paris of all places, and that's one place where you feel like you should be able to be pretty comfortable. It's another major city, but it also kind of gives you like pause before like, you know, do I want to hold my significant other's hand? Do I want to take a picture too closely with somebody else? And at this point in my career, I've definitely gotten over a lot of that. I definitely don't hide any details from my team or the people I work with. Now that we've launched out a Dish, there's not really anything left to hide from anybody anymore. But like also like being at Dish, I've had the benefit of working for some really great managers. Like Dana McLeod was my first manager, and if anybody's worked with Dana, she's fantastic. It makes you feel like really open and honest like right away. Christy Reindl is my current manager. She's great. Kyle is our executive sponsor, and when I first started, one of the things I noticed is he has a picture of him and his husband on his desk and is very, very open about these things. So I had a lot of kind of really good examples to start with. But it's just kind of interesting how your background does kind of tend to like make you both optimistic and a little like, maybe I should pull back on some things. You never quite know what that right balance is. But
Thank you.
So, all right, so I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was a lot of Hispanic people, so I really grew up in that environment, and to me it was pretty normal. So I liked the diversity, and it wasn't different for me, which makes me a little naive as you started figuring out the differences. But something that was important to me was as I raised my children, I have both a son and a daughter, I wanted them to feel the same way that I felt, that it wasn't different, it wasn't a big deal, it's just people and you're part of that. So that was my focus, but they can't be naive, so you kind of have to find that balance as well. And I remember my daughter, when she was in elementary school, she comes home one day and she says, everybody was picking on this little boy, and I don't remember what his name is, but I said, well, why were they picking on him? This is, I don't know, I guess because his skin was brown. And it was just that view, so we kind of had to talk about that. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what color your skin is. So my kids, right, it was very rewarding to see that. And then, you know, her best friends were always different Asians or things like that. And so it's really important to me to make sure your kids, you know, you teach them they're just people, and diversity is around there, and you can learn a lot about culture. So we always had culture conversations and different things like that, as they surrounded themselves with just a wide variety of different type of people. So that was, so that's my experience.
That's great. Thank you, Shannon. I want to carry on a point, Barry, I think that you were drawing out. So you kind of look at some of the studies, especially around work environments, that people have a tendency to edit a little bit of who they are in certain scenarios. Or to the panel, you know, there have been times when you've edited out aspects of your life either to feel more included or to move forward in a job or to have, to not make yourself uncomfortable or make someone else uncomfortable.
We'll start on this end.
So I definitely have in a couple of weird ways, right? So one, as you progress up a company, there's people that truly want to grow and do well and work their way up, and there's other people who want a quicker way to get there. And so in my own life, I've had people try to befriend me, right, and learn more about my family and act like they care about me when they really don't, because they really want me to promote them up or do whatever. So throughout my career, I would say I definitely edit it. So I leave a lot of things out for most people unless you're really close to me, right? So I mean, I have both my children are adopted. I have an autistic son. I have a daughter who has huge sensory problems, and most people who know me well enough know that. And I've talked to a lot of people around here, but so sometimes you have to actually edit the opposite way you would think, right? So it's kind of odd. And then the other side of that, I'm really unedited in the other direction. So like with my wife and her family and the way she gets treated and stuff, I'm probably the most arrogant pain in the ass guy there is on the planet when it comes to that, because I just don't, if you don't respect my family, whether it's my autistic son, my daughter, my Hispanic wife, or my father-in-law or whatever, I'm the first person that's going to jump in your crap and say, well, who the hell are you and why do you think you can treat somebody different? And so that part I don't edit, but the other part, I was thinking about this and it actually hit me because I hadn't thought about it, Dave, right? And maybe you have a different viewpoint too, but I actually do edit some of those things because I don't really think people are going to, not everybody truly cares about what I'm saying. Sometimes it's a way to use me to do something for them, right? And I'm a very open person, and the people that know me would tell you that I'll always tell you the truth no matter what it is, good or bad. I will hold you accountable to do your job as an adult, but I won't hold you accountable to your job as a child. So, I mean, I don't feel like I have to micromanage people. But when it comes to that, I do edit things in my life that I probably don't bring out that I should at times, and I don't, right? So kind of an odd way to look at it, I guess.
Take one other perspective from the team on it, or
I'll go. Did you want to go? I would just say it depends on the audience. So I don't think I've purposely edited anything, but it depends on the audience, the situation, how relevant it is. I'm also not a big sharer, but if it's relevant to the conversation or what we're having, then I'll definitely address it. If it's things you don't need to know or doesn't really come into play, then I may edit it or avoid the information because it's not really relevant to the conversation.
So edit probably isn't applicable for me. I probably don't leave things out of my life. They're pretty generic, right? But I do change, right? There's a thing that you will do when you're at work. I think part of that is, you're not, it's a more formal environment. But there are things that the way that I'm speaking right now, I may shift when I come to work, right? I may shift when I'm in a elevator, right? To make other people feel comfortable that you do things because you kind of look at, hey, how is this person seeing me through their, it's this weird perception thing, right? I perceive you, I put a stereotype on you so that I can act a different way so that you're not uncomfortable. Really, really twisted kind of stuff, but those are real things that we do, right? And so, like I said, I don't necessarily edit, things from my conversation about my family. I talk about my family. I don't really, like I say, we live a pretty generic suburban life. Shannon's my neighbor. We live out in the same. Our kids went to the same schools and that kind of thing. But again, it's like there's some deeper things that we do, kind of edit and change in terms of the way that we operate.
no, I see it for sure. Each of you had the opportunity to lead a team here, and we often talk about how our hiring practices, and we focus on things like energy and intelligence or need to achieve or kind of the driving thoughts of our practices. As a hiring manager, how do you play into a perspective to ensure that you're building a diverse and inclusive environment? What are the ways that you're ensuring that you're allowing everyone to kind of bring their entire selves into the conversation versus having to edit part of how they may behave or facts that they would share.
So for myself, I do think, excuse me, education is one of those things as far as educating yourself on people in general, emotional intelligence, things like that. I'm very open, probably to a fault. My team's sitting here in the front. I share a lot of myself. I'm very open. I come to work and I am who I am regardless. And that's just with maturity. I wasn't always that way. I think I edited myself a lot more before. But I do feel like being open, coming up with words for the year of like collaboration. How do we talk together? How do we get to know each other? But also realizing that we're all different. And so that's part of that educating and each other is that everybody has a different amount of themselves that they share based on who they are, introverted, extroverted, etc. And so really learning how to change myself based on the other person's style has been really important to me. To ensure that if I'm talking to somebody and I'm expecting an answer right away, because I would have given an answer right away, trying not to judge, give grace in those situations. So really just opening up my mind and changing, putting myself in other people's shoes. And that's only come with age. I have to say when I was younger, I did not have a good skill at that. I judged people based on my filter. And so as I've gotten more comfortable with myself, I do feel like it impacts the diversity and the ability for people to be themselves on my team. Yeah.
Other feedback? If you had a,
I'm the only one doing
no, it's okay. No, I think it's a fascinating conversation, right? And I think you see it oftentimes in moments of, again, kind of those hidden characteristics of diversity, Maria, that you talked about. And I think sexual orientation or gender identity are ones that come into the conversation. Children or another that come into conversation where people don't want to mention where they're at in maybe a family formation life cycle. Like I don't want to mention that I'm going to have a kid next year because it may impact my career progression. Are there things as an organization or things as the leaders of sitting in the room learning that we can do to purposely open up that environment to ensure that individuals aren't feeling the need to withhold information?
I don't know. I think interviewing is one heck of a skill, right? And not everybody's very good at it. Some people are for sure. But one of the biggest things for me when someone comes in, I'll probably spend a good 20 minutes of the interview actually not even asking questions about stuff, just kind of learning about them and let them learn about me, right? Because I'm trying to build a trust, right? Because if I get the trust, then they'll be way more open just about what they want as a career. Because for me, if they have the energy, the need to achieve, and the intellect, that's amazing and great. But if I don't know what they want as a career, how do I know that I'm going to be able to help them long term? And so if I don't get them to open up and tell me what they really want in life, then it's going to be really hard. So I can hire somebody, hope that I've made the right decisions. I bring them in, and 2 years later, I'm having to talk with them or HR and just say, person's just not the perfect fit. Can we find another place, right? And I want to learn that as early as I possibly can. So I think that's a big one, Dave, is to get that, get enough belief and trust in each other that you can have those discussions. Doesn't always work. I mean, there's plenty of times where I just walk out of the interview thinking, man, I didn't even get that person to open up at all. So I don't know what they really want in life or what's important to them. And then other times you walk out and say, wow, that was like a whole book in 40 minutes, right? And you've learned a lot of what to do. So some of that's, I think, important to there. And the other one for me, I mean, when we started out, I'm looking for the three things, right? I mean, I'm not looking at anything else other than how smart are they? Do they have a good intellect, right? And can they really achieve what they say? And with that is what's their drive to achieve that? And that's actually, I use the drive one to kind of start figuring out where they want to go, right? Because you start with that and push. The other one is one of the interview questions I always ask everybody, which gets everybody really, gets your hackles up and actually allows you to get a little more trust, is about failure. So I always ask two questions about failure, like what's the biggest failure in your entire career and why? And most people will get really quiet and say, I've never been asked that question before. I'm like, yeah, it's okay, right? We all fail. And they'll get quiet again, and I'll say, look, I'll give you a good example, right? And I walk them through something I did when I worked for a company, Contel Government Systems. I shut down the whole NORAD and missile defense communication system by accident, which is a huge mistake. And it was by accident, but I had 4 MPs with guns in the back of my head screaming at me for 4.5 hours, right? Afterwards, because they thought I had done it on purpose, right? So it was interesting. So usually you can start with that conversation, and they loosen up a little bit because they think, wow, I'm not that dumb, right? And so it kind of helps. But I think that's a big thing, Dave, right? You got to get people to be willing to feel comfortable enough with you to talk, right? And sometimes you do that in multiple ways. That's one. Another way is just uncomfortable silence. And I don't know how you guys feel about that. But in an interview, a lot of times I'll ask that kind of a pointed question, and then I'll just get quiet, and that person will get quiet, and then they won't talk to you. And they're kind of waiting for you to take the conversation back over, and I just won't. So I'll just stare. So I just stare in Duncan's eyes and right? Nice eyes, by the way. And eventually, right, that person will start talking about stuff that, because you feel like you have to fill a gap, right? As a human being, we all feel like we have to, especially in an interview. And a lot of times that's when more personal stuff will come out that you can help kind of lead them for a good direction for their career, right? But I don't know, it's hard to get down to, everything that feeds somebody, but those are key ways that I try to help change that with just our energy, need to achieve, and intellect.
I think I agree with Jeff for sure in terms of creating that comfortable environment and making it a conversational interview. One of my concerns, though, is getting diverse candidates in, right? And I don't know how we're attracting diversity into DISH, right? And it was funny, I had a conversation with some colleagues about that. We had a CODIV is a group that's trying to create some awareness about diversity, and we had a happy hour down at DGC, which, hey, they asked me to go to since I was down there, and I wasn't forced to, but I was like, hey, you're available, and it would kind of be something that you should probably go to, right? So anyway, but before that, I had colleagues asking me, it's like, well, how do you feel about that, and why don't we see more black people apply at DISH? And it's like, well, I don't know that we don't. I don't know that we do. So if we look at, hey, here's how resumes come in, are we attracting people to this environment, or is there something about DISH that's not attractive? Because again, we hit the national talent pools. It's not like, hey, it's just Denver. Because Denver's not that diverse, but we're out in the United States, and it's like, well, why aren't we seeing that? I think if you look at some of our university recruiting, it's like, well, we typically focus on the executives where they went to school, and we go, hey, these are the great schools, go recruit, right? Are we going after schools that may be more diverse, right? Even in our backyard, are we going down to UCD or Metro, right? Going after a lot of diversity in those kinds of spaces where people aren't maybe they just don't have the financial wherewithal to go to a bigger school. I mean, it's costly these days, right, to go to any college. But those are some of the things that concern me. Is that, hey, I open the door, and I'm open to anyone who wants to come and has that energy and that intelligence and that need to achieve, and they got curiosity, and those are things that we look for. But it's like, I don't know that we're getting that diverse talent coming in the door to even interview them. So that's one of my concerns, and one of the things that hopefully we can look at through these groups is to be able to say, okay, how are we maintaining or increasing our diversity in this organization?
Yeah, no, I think those are the right points to consider. I think having groups like this is a big important step, right? Because as individuals get here, we want them to be able to look up and see leaders like yourselves in important positions, right? And understand that they can aspire to be in roles like that. Just as a side note, we are actually coming back and looking at school listings and seeing where do we recruit. DISH has had success in the middle of the country, right? And oftentimes it's been, well, that's where people stay. It's also not always the most diverse space. It's also where within those schools you go, and so I know the team's actively working on that. For the first time ever, I think 2 weeks ago, we launched a diversity and inclusion page on our career site that didn't exist before. And so I think just representing that it's an important factor to the organization goes in a long way, but I absolutely appreciate the perspective, Duncan.
It's intention.
Yeah.
It's intention.
It is.
And that's actually, it's incremental benefits, but it's intention and putting it on the page, talking about it, having an open discussion, not shying away from what we said, some of the questions. It's like, whoo, those are, you start touching on things that you don't really know how to speak about because we haven't talked about it, but it's intention and it's being deliberate. And I think that's, when you educate yourself on things, you become more open and accepting of things.
Yeah. Even having that co-div event at DGC, right, hosted on one of our sites was a purposeful play to attract, right? It's a constant conversation we're having. I think we just have a few minutes left. One of the interesting aspects around intersectionality, right, is how we cross over as teams in the way, you may not, while representing a specific resource group, it's probably not all that you are. How can we, as leaders in the organization and all of the folks in the room, aspire to be allies to those that we may not be a member of the group with, right? How do we provide the environment where everyone can be successful in that way? And are there ways that you're taking steps to ally to other organizations?
I've been bogarting the mic, so I'm letting somebody else get for a minute. I'll go.
Well, I think it is definitely, hey, crossing the across the resource groups that we support, that we continue to bring awareness and that we continue to take a stand, right? So, okay, I understand a little bit more about your walk, and when I see something that is contrary to that, I'm aware of it now, and then I can take a stand and say, hey, we need to modify our behavior in this situation, or we need to take hold of that opportunity in that situation. Hey, there's an opportunity to learn and actually grow, and hey, we should spearhead an effort to do that. And you could, hey, I'm gonna come across and say, hey, we need to get together with your group to do something that, hey, I see an opportunity here because of some experience that we've run into. So like I say, it's good to be able to have the different resource groups and focus down kind of this vertical, but it's like the horizontal will make us even more powerful, right? The intersection of that, right?
Barry?
I think one thing that's really important is just being willing to have these more difficult conversations and being willing to, maybe this forum isn't necessarily the most appropriate to have some of those conversations, but being willing to be honest and transparent and sharing your own life, I think gives other people an insight into it and lets them be like, oh, maybe I didn't know somebody who identified as LGBT before, but you're just as boring as my wife and I. All I do is talk about my dogs and sit at home on Friday nights. And I think the more you have those conversations, the more you realize you have a lot more in common than you think you do. And as far as being able to support other groups, I just look at all the different groups that we have represented on the panel today, and there's somebody out of Dish that could be a member of every single one of those groups. And so I think it's when we realize those things and we work together and we make sure that everybody feels heard and everybody feels supported, then hopefully everybody will be able to feel more comfortable to have those conversations. And the more that you have them, I think it's just kind of a domino effect.
I even said this as you all started walking in, because I've only been on panels for Dish Women's Network as of today, and I looked at just the diverse group that came in today, and this is the kind of forum that we want to have where we can have some of those conversations, not necessarily, like you said, always in a panel, but just more conversation amongst everyone versus just select groups.
Yeah, and I think it's been a big reach for each of the resource groups to ensure that their populations are much broader than just the primary characteristic that they are having conversations on, right? And how individuals feel like they can participate and interact at a level. And Tasha, you've mentioned a couple of times education, right? Just learning, and I think Barry, to your points as well, how critical it is, and not assuming. So, words like partner and spouse versus husband and wife, right? Not assuming that someone's at a certain stage of life or children's status, or assuming that they haven't had this set of experiences often goes a long way, and asking the questions rather than just jumping into to your side of the conversation. I want to thank each of you for your participation. I want to thank the team here. Barry mentioned not always this forum being the point of conversation. One of the neat things that we've seen recently is how the organization is having many more events, right? And so I'm so proud of the African American Network with their kickoff and the work that you've done. I was in Riverfront this week and saw the pictures of the food trucks from all month, and the involvement of all of our facilities was a big deal. We've got a series of kind of events throughout the year that we're working, calendaring on, and then one of the things I'm really proud of is the leadership group gets together now on a quarterly basis and sits down with the CEO and has a conversation, and myself, around what are the places that we as an organization can continue to strive to get better, and whether that's in policies or procedures, whether it's in recruiting, whether it's our benefits package. It's a conversation that's active and one that we want you to participate in as well. So know that if you've got feedback, our ears are open from a leadership perspective. I know the leaders that are representing their each individual resource groups are also great advocates for you. So if there's things that you want to share, or conversations that you want to have, let's have them. Because I think one of the ways that we can continue to drive this together as an organization is to make sure that you know that we're thoughtful and passionate about it as a leadership team, and two, not afraid to answer the difficult discussions. So look forward to more sessions like this, but most importantly, just want to say thank you to each of you for coming out and participating today. So we really appreciate it.